Welcome everyone. It is 3 p.m. and it's time for the Server Room Show. This is episode 86. Today I continue part 2 of the episode of last week, episode 85, dedicated to little Pocok and continue talking about Microsoft DOS. I left it talking about the different versions throughout Microsoft DOS's history, and I reached exactly where I wanted to finish with that episode of last week. I talked about Microsoft DOS 6.6.22 retail, which was the last standalone version from Microsoft, and it was also the last version from Microsoft to run on an 8086 or 286 computer. That marked an end of an era because after Microsoft DOS 6.6.22 came Microsoft DOS 7.x, and that was already under the Microsoft Windows era, Windows 95, Windows 95A, because previous releases of Windows required DOS to be installed upon, and now after version 6.6.22, now Microsoft DOS from Windows 95 forward, Microsoft DOS was not required to be installed on the computer, and then after to be able to install Microsoft Windows on top, but Windows came with its built-in Microsoft DOS version to use kind of like a best phrase possible, and this indeed marked a new era. Version 7.0, as I mentioned, with Windows 95 and Windows 95A, gained support for VFAT, long file names, and 32 bits signed integer error level. A new editor, jo.sys, is an alternative file name of the io.sys kernel file and used as such for special purposes. jo.sys allows booting from either CD-ROM drive or hard disk. Last version to recognize only the first 8.4 gigabyte of a hard disk. The var internal command ver prompt reports the Windows version 4.00950, 4.00950. Version 7.1, Windows 95B, Windows 98 and Windows 98 SE support for FAT32 file system, last general purpose DOS to load Windows. The var internal command prompt reports the Windows version 4.00 1111 and 4.10.1998 or 4.10.2222. Then Microsoft DOS 8.x, version 8.0, which came with Windows Me, integrated drivers for faster Windows loading, 4 different kernels, io.sys observed. The var internal command prompt reports the Windows version being 4.90.3000. Version 8.0, then with Windows XP, DOS boot disk created by XP and later contained files from Windows Me. The var internal command prompt reports the Windows version 5.1. So now, after, as I mentioned, with starting of Microsoft DOS 7.x, these Microsoft DOS versions came integrated into the respective Windows versions: Windows 95, Windows 95A, Windows Me, Windows XP. Windows 98, Windows 98 SE, and like I said, there was no prerequisite having Microsoft DOS installed on the computer to be able to install Windows on top, like with Windows 3.11, for example. It was not required anymore to have Microsoft DOS, and then you went on and installed Windows on top. Localized versions of Microsoft DOS existed for different markets, while Western issues of Microsoft DOS evolved around the same set of tools and drivers, just with the localized message languages and differing sets of supported code pages and keyboard layouts. Some language versions were considerably different from Western issues and were adapted to run on localized PC hardware with additional BIOS services not available in Western PCs. Support multiple hardware code pages for displays and printers, support DBCS, alternative input methods, and graphics output. Affected issues include Japanese DOS V, Korean Arabic ADOS 3.3 and 5.0, Hebrew HDOS 3.3 and 5.0, and Russian RDOS for that 01 and 5.0, as well as some other Eastern European versions of DOS. So again, I can only say that of course, me being from Hungary, I had no experience with neither Japanese or Korean or Arabic or Hebrew, not even Russian versions of Windows, and the previously mentioned localized Western West Germany made. I think it was Robotron I mentioned in the previous episode, in episode 85, that there was some special versions for Eastern Bloc countries. I've not been familiar with that either. Maybe it's just pure luck. Maybe I just didn't have the chance. Neither the Russian version, I might have had a chance, as we were an Eastern Bloc country, but the aforementioned Eastern Bloc derivatives of Microsoft DOS, the one I mentioned in the previous episode 85, DCP Disk Control Program 3.20 and 3.30, which existed in the late 1980s, produced by this East German electronics manufacturer Web Robotron. I neither made an acquaintance of those versions, and less of the Japanese, Korean, Arabic, Hebrew, and not even the Russian one. I don't speak or read Russian, so I didn't learn in school, if anyone wonders. Notable Microsoft DOS applications, I mean, there were so many, and maybe these ones are just notable for me, or maybe these are the ones I mostly remember. As I said, there were so many applications and good ones. And why is it important, and why I always try to emphasize on the available set of applications? Because a system or an operating system, or being it a platform or any architecture, is only as good as the applications available for it. Because no matter how good or innovative your architecture or platform or the operating system, if the amount of applications or the set of applications available for the platform or the operating system are just a couple of applications, and very few developers or software companies support it, then not really much can be done with that application, with that platform, and with that operating system. Therefore, no matter how innovative or good it could be or it is, there is no use to it. I mean, you can give me an operating system called whatever, on a platform called whatever, running on architecture Zeta. It's not because of the IBM Z architecture I just made with architecture O. For O, I don't know. But if the set of applications I want to use are not available on it, and I cannot even get basic things done, like writing a document or working with some spreadsheet or calling another computer via the network, basic tasks for what you would use a computer for, then no matter how great the underlying architecture or the operating system itself, it's not gonna be successful. And where I want to go with this line of thought is that there were many applications for Microsoft DOS. It was very popular, and so many applications were available. I just mentioned a couple of them in the show notes with some screenshots. Some I remember, some I had to look up. Notable ones like text editors and complete office suites before Windows brought us, the office suites with all the graphical user interface and everything. For example, WordStar, the text editor. It's interesting because WordStar under Microsoft DOS. In an interview, George R.R. Martin himself confessed that he uses an old computer. It doesn't even have an internet connection or anything. It runs Microsoft DOS, and he's using, I think he mentioned WordStar 4.0 to write those Game of Thrones books. So it just shows that if you have the talent and if you are capable, you can write great things, so to say, in black and white in Microsoft DOS in a simple text editor. And if you are not talented or not having the talent, then it doesn't matter. I can provide you with the greatest and the most expensive text editor or office suite available with a beautiful graphical user interface. It's not gonna have an effect on what you are outputting. So great people can do great things with whatever tools they are given, being it basic tools or high-end modern tools. Corel WordPerfect 6.2 was, for example, a complete office suite for DOS. It was not the first one, but one of the first ones. Lotus Symphony, for example, early spreadsheet applications similar to Lotus 1, 2, 3, actually from the same family, from Lotus. Microsoft also had Microsoft Works 2.0 for Microsoft DOS, DBase 3 and versions after that, DBase 4 and even earlier versions for database applications. Multiplan was another spreadsheet application. Development tools, I do remember Turbo Pascal, I have to say. I had to learn some Pascal in high school. No C++, unfortunately. Borland C++ and the Turbo C++ was both from Borland. Turbo C++ was aimed for the home market, and Borland C++ was aimed for the professional market. File management, I just mentioned the notorious Norton Commander version 5.5 has a screenshot in the show notes. It just really scratching the surface with Microsoft DOS and the amount of applications. You could really do anything. You could do financing, you could do spreadsheets, preparing documents, personal organizers, writing programs. It was great times. Distraction free great times. I will talk about that in my closing arguments or closing thoughts. The competition on microcomputers based on the Intel 8086 and 8080 processors, including the IBM PC and clones. The initial competition to the PC-DOS Microsoft DOS line came from Digital Research, whose CP/M operating system had inspired Microsoft DOS. In fact, there remains controversy as to whether QDOS was more or less plagiarized from early versions of CP/M code. Digital Research released CP/M 86 a few months after Microsoft DOS, and it was offered as an alternative to Microsoft DOS and Microsoft's licensing requirements, but at a higher price. Executable programs for CP/M 86 and Microsoft DOS were not interchangeable with each other. Many applications were sold in both Microsoft DOS and CP/M 86 versions until Microsoft DOS became preponderant. Later, Digital Research operating systems could run both Microsoft DOS and CP/M 86 software. Microsoft DOS originally supported the simple .com, which was modeled after a similar but binary incompatible format known from CP/M 80. CP/M 86 instead supported relocatable format using the file extensions .cmd. To avoid name conflicts with CP/M 80 and Microsoft DOS.com files, Microsoft DOS version 1.0 added a more advanced relocatable .exe executable file format. Most of the machines in the early days of Microsoft DOS had differing system architectures, and there was a certain degree of incompatibility and subsequently vendor lock-in. Users who began using Microsoft DOS with their machines were compelled to continue using the version customized for the hardware, or face trying to get all of their proprietary hardware and software to work with the new system. In the business world, the 8080X based machines that Microsoft DOS was tied to faced competition from the Unix operating system, which ran on many different hardware architectures. Microsoft itself sold a version of Unix for the PC called Xenix. In the emerging world of home, uses a variety of other computers based on various other processors were in serious competition with the IBM PC, the Apple II, early Apple Macintosh, the Commodore 64, and others did not use the 8080X series of processors. Many 8080X machines of different architectures used custom versions of Microsoft DOS. At first, all these machines were in competition. In time, the IBM PC hardware configuration became dominant in the 8080X market, as software written to communicate directly with the PC hardware without using standard operating system calls ran much faster, but on true PC compatibles only. Non-PC compatible 8080X machines were too small of a market to have fast software written for them alone, and the market remained open only for IBM PCs and machines that closely imitated their architecture, all running either a single version of Microsoft DOS compatible only with PCs or the equivalent IBM PC DOS. Most clones cost much less than IBM branded machines of similar performance and became widely used by home users, while IBM PCs had a large share of the business computer market. Microsoft and IBM together began what was intended as the follow-on to Microsoft DOS, PC-DOS called OS2. When OS2 was released in 1987, Microsoft began an advertising campaign announcing that DOS is dead and starting that version 4 was the last full release. OS2 was designed for efficient multitasking as was available in operating systems since 1963 and offered a number of advanced features that had been designed together with similar look and feel. It was seen as the legitimate heir to the kludgy DOS platform. For those who might not know, I did an episode of OS2, IBM OS2. You can look it up in the archives or in the podcast platforms, and you can listen to those episodes. They are good episodes. Microsoft DOS had grown in spurts with many significant features being taken or duplicated from Microsoft's other products and operating systems. Microsoft DOS also grew by incorporating by direct licensing or feature duplicating the functionality of tools and utilities developed by independent companies such as Norton Utilities, PC Tools, Microsoft Antivirus, QEMM Expanded Memory Manager, Stacker Disk Compression, and others. During the period when digital research was competing in the operating system market, some computers like Amstrad PC 1512 were sold with floppy disks for 2 operating systems, only one of which could be used at a time. Microsoft DOS and CPM86 or a derivative of it. Digital Research produced DOS Plus, which was compatible with the Microsoft DOS 2.11, supported CPM86 programs, had additional features including multitasking, and could read and write disks in CPM and also MS-DOS format. While OS2 was under protracted development, Digital Research released the Microsoft DOS compatible Dr. DOS 5.0, which included features only available as third-party add-ons for Microsoft DOS. Unwilling to lose any portion of the market, Microsoft responded by announcing the pending release of Microsoft DOS 5.0 in May of 1990. This effectively killed most Dr. DOS sales until the actual release of Microsoft DOS 5.0 in June 1991. Digital Research brought out Dr. DOS 6.0, which sold well until the pre-announcement of Microsoft DOS 6.0 again stifled the sales of Dr. DOS. Microsoft had been accused of carefully orchestrating leaks about future versions of Microsoft DOS in an attempt to create what in the industry is called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt regarding Dr. DOS. For example, in October 1990, shortly after the release of Dr. DOS 5.0, and long before the eventual June 1991 release of Microsoft DOS 5.0, stories on feature enhancements in Microsoft DOS started to appear in InfoWord and PC Week. Brad Silverberg, then Vice President of System Software at Microsoft and General Manager of its Windows and Microsoft DOS business unit, wrote a forceful letter to PC Week, signed on the 5th of November 1990, denying that Microsoft was engaged in FUD tactics, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. To serve our customers better, we decided to be more forthcoming about version 5.0 and denying that Microsoft copied features from Dr. DOS. The feature enhancement of Microsoft DOS version 5 were decided and development was begun long before we heard about Dr. DOS 5.0. There will be some similar features with features with 50 million Microsoft DOS users. It shouldn't be surprising that DRI has heard some of these same requests from customers that we have. So not blaming, but saying that they came to the same conclusion of what users might want from future releases, and it's not an intellectual idea just from digital research company who made Dr. DOS. The pact between Microsoft and IBM to promote OS2 began to fall apart in 1990 when Windows 3.0 became a marketplace success. Much of Microsoft's further contributions to OS2 also went into creating a third GUI replacement for DOS, Windows NT. IBM, which had already been developing the next version of OS2, carried on development of the platform without Microsoft and sold it as the alternative to DOS and Windows. Legal issues. As a response to digital research's Dr. DOS 6.0, which bundled Superstore disk compression, Microsoft opened negotiations with the Stack Electronics, vendor of the most popular DOS disk compression tool, Stacker. In the due diligence process, Stack engineers had shown Microsoft part of the Stacker source code. Stack was unwilling to meet Microsoft's terms for licensing. Stacker and withdrew from the negotiations. Microsoft chose to license Vertisoft's double disk, using it as the core for its double space disk compression. Microsoft DOS 6.0 and 6.20 were released in 1993, both including the Microsoft double space disk compression utility program. Stack successfully sued Microsoft for patent infringement regarding the compression algorithm used in double space. This resulted in the 1994 release of Microsoft DOS 6.21, which had disk compression removed. Shortly afterwards came version 6.22 with a new version of the disk compression system, Drive Space, which had a different compression algorithm to avoid infringing code. Prior to 1995, Microsoft licensed Microsoft DOS and Windows to computer manufacturers under three types of agreement. Per processor, a fee for each system the company sold. Per system, a fee for each system of a particular model, or per copy as a fee for each copy of Microsoft DOS installed. The largest manufacturers used the per processor arrangement, which had the lowest fee. This arrangement made it expensive for the large manufacturers to migrate to any other operating system, such as Dr. DOS. In 1991, the US government Federal Trade Commission began investigating Microsoft's licensing procedures, resulting in a 1994 settlement agreement limiting Microsoft to per copy licensing. Digital research did not gain by this settlement, and years later, its successor in interest, Caldera, sued Microsoft for damages in the Caldera versus Microsoft lawsuit. It was believed that the settlement ran in the order of 150 million US dollars, but was revealed in November 2009 with the release of the settlement agreement to be 280 million US dollars. So this was part 2 of Microsoft DOS, followed on from episode 85 of last week, and with this episode 86, part 2 is concluded. I have to see how much material I have left. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be enough for another episode or not. I might need to, as always, bundle it together with something else. I want to include it because it's interesting for those who want to run Microsoft DOS and its modern alternatives, FreeDOS, and using emulation like DOSBox and DOSEMU, and I want to talk about that and a little bit more of Microsoft DOS, what I have left here, and of course the closing thoughts, what I left for the end, and I really wouldn't like to leave them off. Let's see how it goes, and what I bundle it together with next week in episode 87. Thank you very much, and see you next Saturday.